We continue this morning's study in Philippians in what will be a short 5-week series that we've entitled Joy Ride. Father Bob began last week and covered some of the basics. Really important in this is that Paul is writing from prison. He's writing this letter to a church that he planted in a town called Philippi. They are the Philippians. And so the context of this letter underlies the significance of why this letter is known as the joyful letter. Why we've entitled this series on Philippians, Joy Ride. So please let that be a part of our understanding of this as we continue. How in the world could this letter be known as joyful? Paul's in prison. It's not because prisons for enemies of the state were particularly nice. It's not because he was treated particularly well. The whole point of the letter rests in the answer to the question. He's in jail. What's his joy about? There's his suffering, and yet there's more, much more. Let's pray. Father in heaven, open our hearts and our minds to your word and open us up to what Paul is talking about this joy that he's got. And allow it to seep into our lives. And we pray in Christ's name. Amen. Amen. So I have to tell you, and I think Bob said as well, this is one of our preachers, maybe for us, it's one of our favorite books to preach about. It's maybe one of the most important books in the Bible, worth knowing well. It's very short. One of the things I did back in the 90s when I was, charging hard after my faith was write it out. Wrote it out kind of like a letter. And you kind of can look at it the way it was supposed to be looked at. It was a letter. So I wrote it out and was able to catch some of the details that way. And it's always been important to me. But it's also important because when your life hands you various challenges, or the theme in your life becomes hardship, not fun, difficult, confused, it helps you through those things. What Paul is doing is he's taking us through his theology in this letter, not making all that stuff go away, but allowing us to get through it. Because God is good and God is loving. And there's a distinction here between the deep kind of joy that Paul's talking about and happiness that might be fleeting or that is circumstantial or short-term. This last week, I was on a plane to Las Vegas. My wife surprised me for my birthday. And I got to tell you, everybody on the way to Vegas is in such a good mood on here. That's happiness, because those same people coming on the way back, not all of them are smiling. Some of them are. So that's happiness. Happiness might also be, for me, I like on Sunday morning when I see tennis shoes in the congregation. And these vintage Vans make me very happy. Midlife crisis. But those are fleeting. Those are circumstances. What Paul is getting at is bigger, deeper. It's grounded. And so it's important to take this and take a look at it, which is what we're doing. Because what Paul's doing is that he's pointing us toward hope himself. Hope in the person of Jesus Christ. Back in 1993, there was a book written by Larry Crabb called Finding God. And it was published then for the first time. And Larry, if you know Larry was already then a very successful evangelical Christian counselor and author. He had authored books since the 70s. And he wrote this book, Finding God, because during church one day, someone mentioned in his ear, an elder of the church said, "You have a phone call." And it was the hardest phone call he ever got because it was the news that his brother had died in a plane crash. A tragedy. And so he starts this book, he writes this book because it just messed him up in his soul and everywhere else. And here's how he characterized it. He says, I've come to a place in my life where I need to know God better or I won't make it. Life at times has a way of throwing me into such blinding confusion and severe pain that I lose all hope. Joy is gone. Nothing encourages me. I wrote this book in response to the desperate cry of my heart to know God better. Perhaps the book is a good one because it reminds us how real hardship can be. And by merely viewing God as sort of a vending machine God, when things get hard, we throw up a prayer coin. Oh, I need you now. Well, God is much bigger. The story is much bigger than vending machine God. It doesn't really work that way. There isn't really a formula that puts up a force field around hardship. We sure wish there were. But the truth is that this life sometimes can be very brutal. Whether it's sickness that we experience, tragedy like Larry and his brother, people can be brutal to us. We can be bullied. The list is long. Those are hardships. So Larry's book is good because it says this is true and it's okay to feel this way. So his project was to find God in the midst of that and in spite of that stuff. I would put Philippians right in there as a book that says hardship of different kinds is very real. And yet, we've got God in heaven who's come down to be with us. And there's something for us to hold on to get us through those times. There's something deep. There's a joy that matters, that can get us through. The Christian life is about that. It's about hope. Hope that can be counted on. And we can say that this letter is joyful is because of hope. Paul has hope, and so can we. Let's jump back into the text. We're doing this series a little differently. We're not doing it sort of thematically. We're actually going through the scriptures because there's so much in there. We continue in chapter 1, verse 18. Paul is still talking about his own circumstances. The first part of the chapter, he's saying, this is what's going on with me. He's still doing that, but he's doing that now by looking a little bit to the future. He not only rejoices to see God at work in his present circumstances, remember in jail, it's advancing the gospel, but he says he will continue to rejoice as God's faithfulness perseveres into whatever circumstances await him. The ultimate outcome of Paul's imprisonment isn't yet known. It's not clear. It's spoken in faith and describes what he thinks will happen, but it's clear he doesn't know what the outcome of his trial could be. It could be he's put to death. It could be that he's freed. It could be that he stays in jail. He doesn't know, and yet that doesn't shake his hope that something good is coming. Let's read it together. I will continue to rejoice, for I know that through your prayers and the help given by the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. Just a footnote there. It could go either way. He doesn't know. For me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. You ever heard that before? When I got to Baylor, that was on t-shirts. It's a powerful scripture. Listen to it again. For me, to live, to be alive, everything is about Jesus and about the hope that we find in him. That churches succeed in that the world can know the good news. But to die is gain. If I am to go on living in the body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet what shall I choose? I do not know. I am torn between the two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far. But it is more necessary for you that I remain in the body. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain, and I will continue with all of you for your progress and joy in the faith, so that through my being with you again, your joy in Christ Jesus will overflow on account of me. So he does know in verse 19 whether it's continuing to live with his church or his death, Christ will be exalted. There's a huge confidence there. And notice that whether he's put to death or not, he doesn't know, but he cares. He cares so much that Christ is known. He's joyful. He's not focusing on his problems, but on the hope that as many people as possible will hear the gospel. And notice how he views his own life and death reality in verse 21 with the, "For me to live is Christ, but to die is gain." He knows it will happen either way. If he dies, he gets to be with Jesus, which he says is better by far. Pause right there. That is a fantastic theology of death. For me to die, I get to be with the Lord. Please remember that. The sermon isn't about theology of death, but please remember this as you go through those things. You would rather die and be with Jesus because he'll be in heaven. Those are words of hope, Christian hope in the face of death. But he goes on to say it's better for them to stay with them so he can minister to them as a young church, so they can get to a place in their faith as a church that's foundationally joyful. Notice that he says in verse 25 and verse 26, and began this section by rejoicing. In spite of his circumstances, he rejoices, which means he believes, he trusts, and he looks ahead. And he's so excited about it and has such a love for his church that he'd rather just stay and make sure that they get it. He would stay as long as he could for the rest of his life so that the church could understand this truth in Christ that it changes everything. That's what he cares about. Now, at this point in the scripture, Paul has started to make a turn from his own circumstances to the circumstances of those he's addressing. He's starting to focus on the Philippians. In verse 12 in chapter 1, he began that section with a Greek phrase that sort of said, "the things about me." And now in verse 27, he uses a similar phrase that means "the things about you." So he's turning to the church that he loves. Let's read. "Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then, whether I come and see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in one spirit, contending as one man for the faith of the gospel, without being frightened in any way by those who oppose you. This is a sign to them that they will be destroyed, but that you will be saved, and that by God. For it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ, not only to believe on him, but also to suffer for him. Since you're going through the same struggle you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. If you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any fellowship from the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and purpose. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others." Now in this section, from verse 27 on to chapter 2, verse 4, with his own example of putting the needs of the church ahead of his own needs, Paul jumps right into encouraging them to do the same thing. After all, if the church is to be effective, they'll have to be able to manage outside persecution. It's maybe hard for us to know what that is, but there are places in the world today where if you're a worshiping Christian, there is outside persecution. You can be put to death. Christians around the world still are, believe it or not, are crucified for their faith. So it's hard for us to get that in our mind, but that's what he's talking about. And he says, just like Christ suffered, you may suffer too. But you'll be saved, and you'll be saved by God. But then also, so there's the outside persecution that you've got to be wary of. And then the internal stuff. The stuff that happens within the family. And that's what he's addressing head on too. He's saying how a family or how a church behaves toward one another matters. With the same love that Christ loved us with first, we are to love each other that same way. Anything less interrupts the purpose, the mission, and success of the church. Paul again uses the term joy in verse 2 of chapter 2. Because what he's saying is if they acted the way they should, it would make his joy complete. You see that? His joy is already full because he knows who Christ is. But because he cares about the church and wants the church to be healthy and to affect the rest of the world around it, his joy is not complete until he knows that they're acting the way they should. For him, that's full joy. It also helps to be of one mind when persecution happens by outside forces. In 28 to 30, he's talking about that. Because for him, he knows persecution's coming. It's going to happen. And he references back in Acts when he and Silas were stripped and beaten and put in jail for throwing the Philippians into an uproar, it said, over the Christian message. So he's saying, look, I've been through it. You may too. Get ready. Get your internal ducks in a row so that as the outside world presses in on you, you'll be ready. Not only to protect yourself, but so you can be a witness to that outside world that's in pain and needs you, needs the gospel. Paul loves his church so much. Paul knows of the love of Christ himself. He knows of the love that Christ has for the world, that the church is to be shaped by. There's such a huge love in that. There's sacrificial love. It's a love that gives. It's a love that isn't passive. He writes about that in a different book, a different letter in Corinthians. He talks about love being active. It's not just this emotion. It does things. It's patient. It's kind. It's slow to anger. We can throw that in here because he's talking about that. Because it's a love that gives life. And because it's a love that gives life, it gives hope. And when the world looks inward at a church, and this is what we've got to pay attention to also. When the world looked inward at a church in the middle of persecution then, and when people who are hurting and coming from a crazy world out there looking at St. Michael's, what are they going to see? Well, if it's a church that lives out those things that Paul is talking about being humble, about not always getting our own way, about being kind to one another, that whole list. What they see isn't perfection. They won't see necessarily a hardship-free community. They won't see a pain-free people. But they will see something different. They'll see a God in the faces of all of us. A God that loves first. They'll see a Lord who transforms. They'll see joy. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your Apostle Paul and his infectious love for you. Lord, help us to take this letter and just apply it into our own hearts so that we as individuals can know what it means to have a joy that's bigger than the circumstance. So that we as a church can know what it means to love one another as you have loved us. So that the hurting world that needs you can see you when it comes here. As we continue this sermon series, God, walk with us, teach us, and open our hearts. We pray in Christ's name. Amen.